another reading I have for you, and it is from, again, Trump Style Negotiation by George H. Ross, Donald J. Trump. Trump Style Negotiation. And the reading I'm going to do for you is going to be quite a long reading. It's telephone and email negotiation tips, which I think it's important for people to understand. And the internet is actually just an extension of the telephone communications. We have like email, and we have face-to-face over the video cameras and the webcams. And we also have telephones, in landline telephones, and also your cell phone or your mobile phone here. I have an LG Q Stylus. So think of this information in the readings I'm about to give in the modern context. It is addressing the modern context, but even further addressing the modern context in relation to the webcams and emails and other internet communications as well. So, telephone and email negotiation tips. I'm going to sit back and read because this is going to be a long one. The telephone is probably the most treacherous device ever created, at least for negotiation. It's not treacherous if you know how to use it, but most people do not. With cell phones, it's even worse. Disruptions to negotiations are deadly. Even without the telephone, it is all too easy to derail a discussion, unless, of course, you don't like the way a negotiation is going and want to change the subject for a while. It's easy for someone to diffuse a train of thought, to change the atmosphere of a negotiation with a little effort, so you must make a conscious effort to stay focused, especially when distractions occur. It's hard enough to maintain focus in a face-to-face negotiation, but it's even worse when it is a telephone negotiation. It was many years before people were ready to accept telephones into their homes. They couldn't understand why anyone would want to put a device in his living room so that someone could summon him with a bell anytime he wanted and start a conversation. Yet this is what we have today, and existing technology has created an even more complex negotiating environment. Good and bad aspects of the telephone. The telephone acts as a speed-up device. It's very different from doing business in person. The time frame of a typical phone call versus a typical meeting effectively proves my point. Ask yourself, what would you consider a very long business call? One hour would be a very, very long business call. However, if you are negotiating in person, 1 hour is considered a short time to negotiate any meaningful transaction. For example, if you are buying a house, negotiations would take many hours or many days. The very nature of the telephone forces everything to occur in a much shorter time frame than face-to-face meeting. People are capable of talking for a limited period and have a tendency to think, enough already, let's get it finished. This is a significant disadvantage because both sides end up with less information. Of course, once you know the pitfalls of a telephone negotiation, you can, with practice, use the telephone to your advantage. Convenience. The convenience of the telephone is also its biggest drawback. If you're receiving a call, the timing could be hazardous to your negotiation strategy. If you're unprepared, distracted, or not in a negotiating mood, you can't control the timing of the incoming call. The person making the call immediately interferes with whatever you're doing at that time, the people you're with, and your schedule, and that puts you at an immediate disadvantage. If you believe in the golden rule doing unto others what they do to you, the opposite works to your advantage. If you're the one making the call, then you are in control, and it's up to the other side to realize the timing is not good and take some defensive action. It's ironic that as a rule, people don't like to defer a phone call even when it's inconvenient. It would be so easy to say, we have a time zone difference and I'm not awake yet. Can you call me back in an hour? But many people will say the timing is fine even when it isn't. They willingly accept the disadvantage because they believe most calls are important. In our culture, we like to get things done quickly. We don't like putting off callers. So once a caller gets someone who's unprepared on the phone, the caller has a distinct advantage. The necessity to answer the telephone has been offset to a degree by caller identification and answering machines, but most people answer the phone when it rings. Some telephone traps. Telephone calls often occur in chaotic situations. When you go into a face-to-face meeting, you will have prepared a thorough outline of goals, a comprehensive list of agenda items, a stack of research kits ready to pass out, and you will have assembled all of the support staff you need to make a compelling argument. Using the telephone, you cannot be as well prepared. The agenda is about the only item that can be adapted to a telephone negotiation. If you're making the call, it's almost a certainty that the other side isn't well prepared. The big question for every telephone negotiation is, how important is the item that one side or both is going to forget? Here are a few suggestions that will give you a huge advantage in any telephone negotiation. Before you make a call, prepare a written agenda for yourself. List the things down in priority, the points you want to cover, and make sure you cover them all. Whenever someone initiates the call to you, ask him exactly what he wants to talk about and just listen and make notes of what he is saying. This should be a one-way conversation. He talks and you listen. It's okay to ask for some clarification and to add, I got it, from time to time, but any meaningful discussion is not started. At the end of the call, you simply say, you caught me at a bad time right now. I'm in the middle of something, so I'll call you back. You can take 10 minutes, an hour, a day, whatever you need to be able to respond in a well-conceived, intelligent fashion to the items that were raised in the earlier call. Then, when you call back, you're in the driver's seat. Now you know exactly what you plan to say, but the other side is not adequately prepared to respond to your thoughts. Remember, people have a tendency to forget things during telephone meetings. So let the other side ramble on in the normal, informal manner of most telephone discussions, and, as I said before, just listen. Someone will, indeed, forget something, and as is most often, the person who receives the call and elects to respond without giving careful consideration to the consequences. Someone will indeed forget something, and it is most often the person who receives the call and elects to respond without giving careful consideration to the consequences. That receiver is far less likely to be prepared. The person making the call is better prepared, even if it's only an informal mental list of things he wants to discuss. As with all negotiations, the telephone negotiation is going to be dominated by the more organized side. You have to train yourself to always be prepared in any telephone negotiation, and train yourself to be ready for every negotiation, especially the ones you have by telephone. You should have at your fingertips all documents you may need, an agenda of items to be discussed, a calculator, an estimate of the duration of the call, and anything or anyone pertinent to the discussion. Don't forget the words of Louis Pasteur. Chance favors the trained mind. Chance favors the trained mind. There's no face-to-face in a telephone call. One of the biggest flaws in a telephone negotiation is that you can't react to anything but the other person's voice. You don't see any facial expressions, any body language, or interplay with others on the call, or any of the many forms of input we might ordinarily use to judge the effect of our message on others, or to gauge the conviction the other side has for the arguments they make. If you want to get a no, use the telephone. It's the worst forum for making a convincing argument and for changing someone's mind. Remember, this includes the internet in general. It's an extension of the telephone. If you want to get a no, use the telephone. It's the worst forum for making a convincing argument and for changing someone's mind. The reactions of other people are invisible to you, so it's much easier for anyone to play power games with you without you even being aware of it. For example, if you're in a conference call and you make a statement, one person on the other side can convey thoughts to the other person with a facial expression or gesture that you will never see. That won't work in a live face-to-face negotiation. The lack of input in a live and in person in the same room with people. The lack of input in a live and in-person discussion is a huge handicap, especially if you are alone and there are two or more people on the other end of the line. They won't work in a live face-to-face negotiation. For example, if you're in a conference call and you make a statement, one person on the other side can convey thoughts to the other person with a facial expression or gesture that you will never see because they're in the same room together and they're communicating. That won't work in a live face-to-face negotiation. The lack of input in a live and in-person discussion is a huge handicap, especially if you are alone. So you're on the other end, they're in that room together, and you're not, especially if you are alone and there are two or more people on the other end of the line. You never know who is listening. And that doesn't mean spies or people listening on the telephone. Believe it or not, this stuff doesn't happen. Okay? So use what we have. You know, a lot of people work very hard. A lot of money went into it. A lot of people fought wars to have the freedom we have and communications we have. Use them. Hey, you never know who is listening. The telephone negotiation presents a special type of challenge. You never know really who is on the other end and what their roles are. The other side might not tell you the truth even if you ask. They might say, "It's just me on the line today." And you might answer, "Good, I'm glad John Smith isn't listening because I can't talk to that son of a bitch since he only creates problems but never comes up with a solution." And of course, John Smith is on the phone because you can have telephone connections that have multiple ends. And of course, John Smith is on the phone and now he's a worse enemy than he was before. If you were in a room face to face, you can see who is there, actually in the room with people. If you were in a room face to face, you can see who is there. Or the other side might tell you, just between you and me, my accounting people don't like your numbers. You can defend your numbers easily enough, and you might even be inclined to say something derogatory about accountants in general. But the chief financial officer, CFO, or some other accountant may also be on the phone. They may be scribbling notes to the person you're talking to, telling him what to say, what to ask, and how to answer. This puts you at a tremendous disadvantage because you don't realize who's there and who is controlling the negotiation. You have to play defense on the telephone. Assume someone else is listening into your conversation and that you have to be careful about what you say. If you believe that you suffer any disadvantage in a telephone discussion, insist on a face-to-face meeting. This disadvantage can't be applied in reverse, of course. If you're going to have a this disadvantage can be applied in reverse, of course. If you're going to have a telephone negotiation with someone, you might be wise to have your accountant or lawyer, president, or other advisor there scribbling notes to you in the same room with you, telling you what to say. If there is going to be an advantage and a disadvantage, you're better off having the former than suffering from the latter. So this disadvantage can be applied in reverse, of course. If you're going to have a telephone negotiation with someone, You might be wise to have your accountant or lawyer, president, or other advisor there scribbling notes to you in the same room, telling you what to say. If there is going to be an advantage and a disadvantage, you're better off having the former than suffering from the latter. No one's spying. There's nothing like that going on. Believe me, it's not happening. So let's put an end to that belief out there amongst people and use the telephone and use the email and use what you got. But use it wisely and think about it before you use it. But use it. Interruptions are deadly. Negotiations always have a certain momentum at a particular time. Negotiations always have a certain momentum at a particular time. Every interruption to the normal flow is a setback. No person can maintain his focus or posture while interruptions are occurring. If you are interrupted, your mind goes elsewhere and your train of thought is destroyed. And the more interruptions there are, the worse this becomes. So if you're on the telephone with someone and he keeps excusing himself to talk to someone else who came into the room or called on another line, you have to nip it in the bud. You need to say, call me at a time when you can talk without interruptions. How's 3 p.m. today? Block out 45 minutes and call me then. Ironically, when you're on the telephone, you might have the habit of accepting the kinds of interruptions that would be entirely unacceptable if you were in a live meeting. Goes for pets and children too, and other distractions. Someone else in your office would never think of disrupting a meeting by walking into the room and asking you a question, but he can telephone you, and if you take the call, they have achieved the same result. Someone else in your office would never think of disrupting a meeting by walking into the room and asking you a question, but he can telephone you, and if you take the call, they have achieved the same result. Sometimes interruptions occur that must take precedence over any telephone negotiation. For example, if Donald Trump walks into my office while I'm in the middle of a telephone call, there's no way I can concentrate on that call while Donald's waiting. I immediately tell the listener, something came up that requires my immediate attention, so I'll have to call you back. Notice I didn't say when I would call or what the reason was why he was not going to, when he was going to call. Notice I didn't say when I would call, so the timing is all mine if Donald's visit requires some immediate action. He also didn't say, oh, Donald just walked in the room. That's what I was intending to say. He doesn't say, oh, Donald's waiting for me. I have to, call back at another time. So something came up that requires my attention. So I'll have to call you back. Notice I didn't say when I would call, so the timing is all mine if Donald's visit requires some immediate action. So it's going to take more time. You can't examine documents. If you're in a face-to-face negotiation, you can make the argument. So if you're in the same room, opposite each other at a table, say, for example, if you're in a face-to-face negotiation, you can make the argument, I've got figures right here that justify my position. You can present the proof to the other person as you're talking. You can't do that on the telephone. Have you ever been on the phone and heard the other person rustling papers? He's looking for the document that justifies his position, but what good is it? All you hear is the rustling of paper. You can't see it. Just as you can't read the other person, you also can't read the other side's documents, and they can't read yours. Both sides are at a disadvantage in this situation. One side can't refute the other side's points because they don't see the other side's documents. You really don't even know if they have any compelling evidence. It could be a negotiating ploy when on the telephone to claim to have compelling evidence. It could be a negotiating ploy when on the telephone to claim to have compelling evidence, knowing the other side can't demand to see it right then and there. So the other person tells you during a real estate negotiation, I have a survey by a reputable brokerage firm showing that the average rent for a building such as yours is only $28 per square foot. You're asking for $35. How do you refute the other side's survey when you're negotiating on the phone? The survey might not exist. It might be 5 years old. It might have been the result of poor sampling. You have no way of knowing that if you can't examine the document. You have no way of knowing that if you can't examine the document. There is a tendency to expect resolution. This is a trap that is indigenous to a telephone negotiation. Somehow, on a telephone call, people expect some type of agreement to result. That doesn't always happen in a face-to-face meeting with people, face-to-face, in the same room with them. In a face-to-face negotiation, you may come to the point where you want to say, let me think about this for a couple of days and then we can get back together. That's not unusual when you're there with the other person. But on the telephone, both parties are prone to settle something one way or the other. If we talk about some issue for 15 or 20 minutes, we both think we have the right to get a definitive answer then and there. Learning to master the telephone. Now that we've given some thought to the intricacies of telephone negotiations, I'm going to show you how to become a master at turning telephone negotiations in your favor. Learn to listen. People don't listen intently on the phone. That's the main thing for you to remember. The basic reason for slipshod listening is that you don't know when something important is coming, only after it has been said. At the same time, you don't really know if the other party is really listening to you. So the problem is twofold. Without any visual cues, you're only responding to what you hear. So you need to put extra effort into really listening intently to what the other side is saying and making notes to remember some key items. If you want to drive someone crazy in a telephone negotiation, don't say anything for a few minutes. Before long, the other side will get frantic and say, "Are you still there? Did we get disconnected? Can you hear me all right?" Or something akin to that. In a face-to-face meeting, there are numerous situations where either one or both sides are silent, maybe just contemplating the answer. In a face-to-face meeting in the same room together. On the telephone, the lack of talking indicates a complete breakdown of communication. So the last speaker feels compelled to fill the void. When you let this happen, the other side is compelled to do the talking, and you will learn a lot more about them than they can learn from your silence. In some situations, this will result in the other side giving you much more than they ever would if you were in a room with them. Ask the purpose of the call. Anytime someone calls you, always ask what his agenda is, why he is calling. Then just listen carefully to his response and talk only when there is more information you can obtain by your response. If he says, "I think the price you're asking is too high," you may respond by asking, "What do you think is the right price?" You're getting more information, but you haven't agreed that the price is too high, and you haven't indicated that you're willing to negotiate. But if he gives you an alternative price, at least you know what his thinking is. You have gained information while giving none in response. After getting all the information you can, you still want to be in control of the agenda. So you should say, "Let me consider what you've said and I'll get back to you." If it's to your advantage, you can set a time for you to continue the discussion. Otherwise, just leave the time open. Meanwhile, you can take whatever action you think is appropriate to tailor a response. Then, when you call him back, you are prepared and have supporting information to bolster your position. You already know how much he said he is willing to pay. You also know at what price you would be willing to sell. If the range of uncertainty is narrow, it should be relatively easy to bridge the gap. Maybe, "Let's split the difference," might be the way to go, or some other appeal to human nature that we discussed earlier. If the gap is wide, you will need to present some compelling reasons for the other side to revise their numbers or prepare to abort with a take it or leave it stance. Always use a checklist or agenda. You should get in the habit of creating and updating a telephone checklist or phone call agenda that lists items in priority order to ensure that you won't leave anything out. You want to be sure to gather as much information as possible if the other side initiates the call, so that when you call them back, you're prepared for everything. So when you're done discussing price and you know what number they have in mind, you can ask, what else do you want to talk about? Maybe delivery dates, representations, or other issues will be raised. When you call back, you have your checklist and agenda and the arguments you will use with whatever backup you need. Then you will be as organized and prepared as you can possibly be. Don't hold telephone negotiations where interruptions may occur. You want to be sure you won't be interrupted during an important telephone negotiation. You should close your door and alert a receptionist or secretary not to put through any calls until you say so. You can control this on your side, but you won't be able to control the same thing for the other side unless you insist on it as a condition for your call. You can say, we have a lot to discuss and we should do it without interruptions. I can clear an hour at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Is that okay with you? Pick a time that works for both parties and you'll be surprised how much will be accomplished. One excellent way to avoid interruptions is to create what I call a quiet hour. Set aside an hour in which you will make all the calls you need to make, but will not permit any outside interruptions, that is, personal visits, deliveries, or incoming calls. I have found that my quiet hour is the equivalent of at least 80 minutes. Try it for yourself and you'll be amazed at how much you can do in that hour. Have all materials available when on the phone. If there is a lot of documentation involved with your negotiation, the telephone is the worst venue to use. But if you have to talk on the phone, be well organized and have everything ready. Have all of your documents easily accessible and well organized to make your arguments. You would never talk into a face-to-face meeting without organizing your materials. Many people are so casual about telephone negotiations that they are ill prepared to negotiate intelligently. Knowing this puts you in control. If you organize well and prepare everything, you will have a clear advantage. It's not just your materials that should be well prepared. You should be sure you have anticipated all that you may need. For example, be prepared to crunch numbers if necessary. Most negotiations involve money and a discussion of it, so you have to be ready to do some on-the-spot number crunching. If numbers may be involved, be sure you have a calculator handy and you or someone on your side knows how to operate it. It's very easy these days with the cell phones. Usually there's a calculator app either already on the phone or one you can install and download to your phone, a calculator app. And you can also use ones in your browser and on your laptop as well. Take good notes. You might be a great note taker in face-to-face meetings, but in a telephone negotiation, I cannot stress enough the importance of good note taking. You must take good notes about all phases of the discussion. What was decided, areas of continuing disagreement, definition of the issues, and itemization of new issues. Want to hear that again? You must take good notes about all phases of the discussion. What was decided, areas of continuing disagreement, definition of the issues, and itemization of new issues. To be of any value to you, your notes must be immediately filed when the call is over. If you wait and the notes get lost or misplaced, you would be better off if the telephone call never took place. Most negotiations consist of a series of discussions and meetings. So your notes should be dated, list the name of person or persons on the other side, and they should be detailed. You should assume you will need to refer to them again later if you are sloppy, you will pay the price for it. You should assume you will need to refer to them again later. And if you are sloppy, you will pay the price for it. Most people don't take the kind of notes I'm referring to. If you have ever watched someone while they're on the phone, they might be having an intense negotiation, talking about important issues, but not taking a single note and maybe even doodling. The telephone negotiation counts as much as a face-to-face meeting, but without notes, it is much more difficult to pin down the other side. If the other side doesn't recall the details of a discussion, it is powerful to be able to tell them the time and date of the conversation and read back what they said. If they don't have good notes, you'll win that argument hands down. Confirm the conversation with a follow-up letter. I've talked previously about documenting your meetings with a periodic follow-up letter summarizing the issues. What was decided, what remains, deadlines, and so on. But this is even more important after a telephone negotiation because people are so casual about telephone conversations, they have a tendency to forget what was said. But this is even more important after a telephone negotiation because people are so casual about telephone conversations, they have a tendency to forget what was said. They are prone to forget the details of their agreements, prone to forget the details of their agreements, and they have a tendency to take the telephone negotiation less seriously. Documenting the details of a telephone negotiation is more critical than it is with a face-to-face meeting. People will rarely respond to the letter by saying, "That's not what we agreed on," or "That's not what we discussed." This is your follow-up letter or your follow-up email. People will rarely respond to the letter by saying, "That's not what we agreed on," or "That's not what we discussed." They either don't read your letter or email, or they don't think the issues you stated are important enough to take issue with immediately. Here again, people underestimate the importance of a telephone negotiation, so they are not likely to challenge anything you say in a follow-up letter. The follow-up letter or email becomes a very important document later if the other side contradicts or conveniently forgets something they agreed to in a previous telephone negotiation. The follow-up letter or email becomes a very important document later if the other side contradicts or conveniently forgets something they agreed to in a previous telephone negotiation. Now, this is an interesting section on email rules of thumb. Unlike the telephone, email communication leaves a paper trail. So the odds are better that everyone will at least take seriously what they write down. Some important things to remember about email. Okay. Grammar and punctuation make impressions. There is a tendency for people to not check spelling in an email, but they should. Spelling and punctuation are not just old-fashioned ideas. They create an impression about your education and intelligence and your attention to detail. They also convey the idea that you care about the impression you make on other people. The impression you make on other people. Non-verbal expressions can be misinterpreted, so be careful. Non-verbal expressions can be misinterpreted, so be careful. When you have only the words to read, you can't hear the tone of voice. When you have only the words to read, you can't hear the tone of voice. So if I write to you, it's important that we discuss this immediately. You can't tell whether I'm in a friendly mood or angry with you. You don't know if I'm being casual or demanding. So I have to be careful how I construct my message. This is email rules of thumb. For example, I might write to you, as you and I have already discussed, the document has to be recorded by tomorrow to meet our contractual deadline. It's important that we discuss this immediately. Now, with an explanation preceding my previous statement, it makes more sense. I'm providing an explanation so you will respond more readily. So the first example given was that if I write to you, it's important that we discuss this immediately. You can't tell whether I'm in a friendly mood or angry with you. You don't know if I'm being casual or demanding. So I have to be careful how I construct my message. So, for example, I might write to you, as you and I have already discussed, the document has to be recorded by tomorrow to meet our contractual deadline. It's important that we discuss this immediately because it has to be recorded by tomorrow to meet our contractual deadline. Okay. Now, with an explanation preceding my previous statement, it makes more sense. I'm providing an explanation so you will respond more readily. I received an email from a woman not long ago. We'd been exchanging emails and working out some details to a deal. All that the message said was, "No, thank you." I received an email from a woman not long ago. We'd been exchanging emails and working out some details to a deal. All that the message said was, "No, thank you." The lack of tone can be easily misunderstood or even be thought to mean something completely unintended. This concerned me because things had been going along quite well, so I was puzzled, and frankly, I couldn't remember exactly what I'd said in my last email. So I looked it up. She had sent me several things I had requested, and I'd sent a reply that simply said, "I received your information, thank you." Now her email made sense. She had meant to answer my message, "Thank you" message. Now her email made sense. She had meant to answer my thank you message by saying, "No, thank you." So she said, "No, thank you." And how it's written here, it's just "no, thank you" with no punctuation. And he looked it up, what she had sent previously before that reply of "no, thank you." She had sent me several things I had requested, and I'd sent a reply that simply said, "I received your information, thank you." Now her email made sense. She had meant to answer my thank you message by saying, "No, full stop, thank you," with an emphasis on the you, i.e., she was thanking me for something I had done for her earlier. So let me use this first sentence here. It's only 5 words, but let me use it as an example about emphasis. So now her email made sense. 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 And that's just me putting an emphasis on each word, but it's also within the context of a sentence. That's why you have to use punctuation and not be too brief. So she was thanking me for something I had done for her earlier. "No, thank you," not "no, thank you." But her tone of gratitude didn't come through. That, combined with a lack of grammar and emphasis, could have led to a misunderstanding. But her tone of gratitude didn't come through in the written words in the email. That, combined with a lack of grammar and emphasis, could have led to a misunderstanding. Follow-up is important and courteous. Following up after a complicated discussion is an effective negotiating tool and a courtesy. Whether your meeting took place in person, by telephone, or by email, a summary is always a smart idea. You can start out by saying, "Thank you for all of your hard work in resolving the details. I'm sure we will be able to arrive at a solution to the remaining issues." You then summarize what you've agreed on, what else needs to be done, and what deadlines, if any, have been set. This maintains clarity and perspective during the negotiation. It also keeps communication open and avoids misunderstandings. Email is an easy method because it doesn't take up any office space. The other side can move your email to an online folder without needing physical file space, like a filing cabinet, and retrieve it easily later on. As long as you are keenly aware of the problems in telephone and email communication, you should be able to manage problems as they arise and manage them so that they do not handicap you during your negotiations. Being aware of the pitfalls makes you a better negotiator. Notice that I never used the words telephone conversation. In this entire chapter, but rather telephone negotiation. Every telephone call or telephone conversation, no matter how casual, is in fact a negotiation, and you should give it as much importance as any other type of negotiation. Don't forget it. That ends the telephone and email negotiation tips. And I am going to do another stream because someone wants me to do the when to use non-binding letters of intent or memoranda of understanding. So I'll do that next. See you then.